He's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 25 years of experience.
And he's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief. And together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about briefs, briefing, and advertising. Well, Howard, we're back. And today we have a very special guest, Bob Hoffman, aka the Ad Contrarian, aka the CEO of Type A Group, which is his little consultancy. Bob is someone who I've been following for several years. I'd say about 5 years. I ran into a video that was called the Ad Contrarian in London, and we'll provide a link to that. That was very entertaining, but it was very informative, and it really helped shape for me a new way of thinking about marketing. And he talks about some of the delusions that marketers are under in modern marketing around the world. And just somebody he's an author. He's written 5 books. We got a scoop that he's working on a 6th book, and just somebody that is hugely entertaining, very funny, very foul-mouthed, which makes me like him even more. So here's our conversation with Bob Hoffman, the Ad Contrarian.
So Henry, we have a fantastic guest today. We have the great and powerful Bob Hoffman, who has agreed to join us for an episode of the Brief Brothers. Bob has been a CEO of an ad agency not once, not twice, but 3 times. I believe at least one of those times your name was on the door. I think he's a veteran of about at least 40 years in the ad business, and he retired from that game in 2013. So for almost 10, you're coming up on what, 9 years?
Yeah, it's been May will be 9 years. Yeah,
9 years as the author and chief culprit of the Ad Contrarian, one of the most well-read blogs in the ad business. He's written, I'm going to say 4 books. 5 books. I saw you on a blog 3-4 weeks ago. I think it was someone you've known for a long time, and you were mentioning that you were thinking about getting started on a 6th book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thinking about it. I don't have it quite nailed down yet what it's going to be, but okay. I'm thinking I've started writing it. I just don't know what the hell it's going to be about. So we'll see. Well,
the way that Bob came to the Brief Brothers is kind of fun. I read his essay, which he posted on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, called The 3-Word Brief. As a former creative and someone who teaches brief writing, that grabbed my attention. It was a long essay, 2,500 words, which sounded like maybe a chapter in an upcoming book, that summarized Bob's attitude and thinking about some of the challenges of marketing today. And he waited until the end to reveal what that 3-word brief was. And I'm spoiler alert, we'll add a link to it so everybody can read it if they haven't already. The 3-word brief was, make us famous. Well, I pushed back. I said, Bob, I love this essay, but to me, that's not a brief. That sounds more like a strategy. Oh, and by the way, would you be a guest on our Brief Brothers podcast? Well, Bob pushed back and he said, you have it exactly backwards. And he didn't respond to the invite. So I said, well, with all due respect, I think you're wrong. It's what I really am missing is there's no answer to the question, why? Why would you want to be famous? Oh, and by the way, would you be a guest on the Brief Brothers? Well, he pushed back again and didn't respond to the invite, but he got a little snarky with me in his answer. And so I pushed back again. I said, well, let's not get personal, Bob. And by the way, would you be a guest on the Brief Brothers? Well, Bob is a gentleman. And he responded, he said, I didn't mean you, Howard. I mean these other weaselly creatives who need to have their hands held every time they get a creative brief. And Henry and I have talked about those before. And then to prove that he was a gentleman, he said, to atone, I'm happy to be a guest on the Brief Brothers. And so that's how Bob arrived. So Bob, thank you for being here. Henry and I are really delighted to have you.
My pleasure. I am happy to be here, and I hope we can have a nice discussion and help some people think straight.
And precisely what Henry and I had in mind. So I really wanted to kind of finish this conversation about that essay.
Yep.
And to get your thoughts on that, because
Yep.
this is what Henry and I talk about. We talk about creative briefs and briefing pretty much all the time. And when I said that make us famous is not the brief, I said it's the strategy, and you quite rightly said no, that's not correct. And I thought about that, and I said you're right, that's not what it is. And I started thinking about it some more, and I realized, you know what? That's really the objective. Make us famous is the objective, or should be the objective for every brand. What I think of as the brief, if you're going to summarize the brief in one sentence, is the proposition.
How and why should we be famous? I think is an important. I agree, it's an objective. I think we've had, by the way, we've had Paul Feldwick on as a guest before, and he talks a lot about the fame model of advertising, the entertainment model of advertising, and we tend to agree with that. That advertising is intended to make brands famous so that you can go and buy them, and to use Professor Sharp's terminology, to create mental availability at the moment of purchase. You can't buy a product that you've never heard of or that you have no knowledge of. So making a brand famous is definitely an admirable goal. It is a goal. But to me, the brief is, well, what things are we going to do or say or demonstrate that can maybe help us get famous?
Yeah. Okay. Let's start at the beginning. Why is it important for brands to become famous? Because people don't think very hard about much of the stuff they buy. They just buy what's, you watch me walk through a supermarket, you walk through a supermarket, and you're pretty much on automatic pilot. I know I'm buying Bumblebee tuna, and I know I'm buying this, and I know I'm buying that. And these are brands that I buy all the time, and I'm familiar with. And I'm familiar with them because they've been made famous. They have been advertised for a long time, or public relations, or they have a famous CEO who is a loudmouth and gets publicity, and so um, so becoming famous is. In the world of marketing, there are no absolutes. There's no always and never. There's no yes and no. There's no black and white. It's just probabilities and likelihoods. And the likelihood is that if your brand is famous, you're going to be much more successful than your competitors who are not famous. So the first thing you have to do, I think, is to achieve some degree of fame. And that should be that if I were your client and you were my agency and I called you into my office and you said, "What's my brief?" I'd say, "Your brief is to make me famous, to make my brand famous." If you do that, I don't care how you do it. How you do it is your job. You're the agency. You tell me how to do it. I don't care how you do it. Just do it. You make me famous, I'm going to be successful. And I'm relying on you to know how to do it. And if you can't do it, I'll find someone who can. That's how I would, if I were a CEO, that's how I would brief you, my agency. Okay. And but agencies don't want that responsibility. They pretend they do, but they don't. They want to be taken by the hand. And oh, you have to say we're this, and you have to tell customers that we're that. And no, if you're a good agency, you say no. Don't tell me how to do it. My job is to tell you how I'm going to do it. And if I fail, fine, I'll fail. But at least I'll be trying to do it my way, not your way, because I know your way. I know how clients think, and that you're usually wrong. And the stuff that you give me as differentiation, as positioning, is usually bullshit, and it usually means nothing to the consumer. And I know what kind of stuff I'm going to get from you because, honest to God, guys, I was in the agency business for 40 years, and that's the way it works. We have to be in the real world. The real world of briefing is usually a waste of time. It's usually bullshit. And it usually doesn't come from the person who should be the briefer. Generally, the way things are briefed is like this. Some brand manager talks to some account guy from the agency and says, we need a YouTube video. And the agency account guy goes back to the agency, talks to the planner or brand strategist, whatever they call them at that particular agency. That person writes up a brief, gives it to the creative director. The creative director looks at it, change this, okay, I agree. Then it goes to a creative team to work on. Now, that's not the way it is everywhere, but that's generally the way I've seen it work. So meanwhile, so you have this telephone game going from it's 5 steps before it actually gets to the person who has to write the ad. It's already been changed 5 different ways by people who've gotten their hands on it. And so then the creative team does the thing, and they bring it back and after a few weeks, they meet with the brand manager who gave them the brief, and he says, yeah, okay, this is pretty good. Then they go to the CMO with this. And the CMO says, what is this? No, this is not what we should be saying. We should be saying something else. What the hell? What are you working on this for? And the agency can't say, well, this schmuck told us to do that. They can't point to the brand manager and say that. So they have to eat shit and say, oh, well, this is what we thought. But okay, so what I'm getting at, you understand where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is not atypical. It's not atypical that it works like this. What should happen, the way briefing should work, is that in every client organization, there's what shall we call him? Let's call him the real decision maker. Okay? The real decision maker, maybe the CEO, maybe the CMO, maybe something else, maybe the chief financial officer, but this is the person, he or she, who can say yes, go make this thing happen. And there's only one real decision maker in every client organization for every brand. There's one. At the agency, there's one real creative leader. Okay? The real creative leader may be the creative director, may be a really good art director, it may be the president of the agency, it may be, but this is the person, the real creative leader is the person that the real decision maker looks to. In every agency, the real decision maker has someone that that she trusts, that she looks to and says, do you think this is good? Do you think this is good, Henry? Do you think this is good? And the way briefing should work is at the very beginning, the real decision maker should meet with the real creative leader and tell the real creative leader what they're looking for. And if that happens, because I had that relationship with a few clients, and we did our best work for those clients, where the person, there was a client, we had a client who was great client. I was the chief creative officer. I don't know what my title was at the time, but there was an assistant creative director who that client really believed in. And the client, he was a guy, and the associate creative director was a lady, and they would get together and they would talk, and great things would happen. Because it wasn't all bullshit. Everyone writing things and changing things, and that's the way briefing should happen. I'm sorry if I'm confusing everyone here, but I think that's the best way. If the real decision maker and the real creative leader get together and talk, great things happen. If it's just a bunch of paper flying around with all kinds of extraneous horseshit in it, nothing good usually happens.
So I gotta chime in here and tell you, I agree 100%, but I think this goes well beyond just briefing, right? This is about
Absolutely.
the relationship
Yeah.
that agencies and clients have, which is not the relationship that I'm led to believe was the relationship that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? We have these very top-heavy client organizations with 50 million layers of people justifying their existence.
Yes.
And so agencies are down on the pecking order. We're vendors that don't have access to real decision makers. Real decision makers and clients generally are just vetoing things. They're not articulating a vision or saying, this is what I want our advertising to be. This is what our brand should be funny. Our brand should be serious. Our brand should be, this is my vision as the decision maker. That would be a pretty important thing for the agencies to know, except we don't have those lines of communication open with any great frequency. I think you're right in that it's the minority of cases.
And it's also, I think, true only on a handful of accounts. The biggest accounts are going to get that kind of one-to-one, C-suite to C-suite, so to speak, rapport. When you've got a lot of other
I
accounts.
don't think so. I think every agency, if given the opportunity, would love to be able to talk to the real decision maker on every one of its accounts.
Would like to,
big
yeah.
or small. They would love to, because it would cut out so much unnecessary work. Everyone would prosper. The agency wouldn't be piling up all these, agencies that were clients used to say to me, well, we want to work with you on an hourly basis because that way we know we can control how many. I said, you're crazy. Working with me on an hourly, our agency on an hourly basis is the worst thing you can do for yourself, because the more hours we pile on, the more money we make, and the more it costs you.
The incentive is to be inefficient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
and we can thank Sir Martin Sorrell and the others who took
sure.
the media function outside of the agencies and all the commission that came with it, where we used to throw in the advertising, the creative for free because there was plenty of money rolling around. Now there's no money rolling around and we're billing like lawyers, except that we're not selling, we're selling hours instead of selling work.
Instead of selling ideas. And so anyway, you're right. The problem with briefing is part of a bigger problem. It's the problem of agency client relations. It always has been. Like you said, I was in the agency business for 40 years, and it was always a problem that we in the agency were dealing with the wrong people. We had, and so what we did was we invented wrong people to deal with their wrong people, so we wouldn't have to sit there and listen to stupid bullshit from the wrong people. We hired people to listen to the stupid bullshit.
Yeah,
And
Bob, I was just going to say, you probably know I teach how to write a brief. I do a lot of workshops, and almost to a workshop, the people who attend are mid-level directors.
Yeah.
I never get anybody. If I get a senior vice president, it's like, did you come to the wrong room? But every now and then, I remember doing a workshop in New York, and a senior vice president from one of the national banks or international banks was there, and she was here, and I was saying some of the things that you're saying, not quite as well as you said them, but about getting to the heart of the matter and cutting out the crap. And she sat like this in the back of the room, scowling at me, and I thought, well, I guess I've lost her. I don't know what's going on. At our first break, I went up and introduced myself and said, "Is everything? Are you enjoying this?" She says, "I'm eating this stuff up. I just don't know how to go and tell the folks upstairs who I work with. They're the ones who should be here, listening to what you're saying about how to write a brief. They will never show up. They don't have the time. They won't make the time to do it, to learn how this stuff." So I hear what you're saying.
But I think to put a more practical spin on it, and Howard and I have had this conversation, I think that the big disconnect is the person who writes the brief isn't the ultimate approver of the work.
Right.
And what the agency can do to push back is to say, does so-and-so, who's the real client
decision maker,
is he on board with this? Because this is what we're going to develop the work to, and we want to, and you're right, agencies roll over and they eat shit when they were directed in the wrong direction by mid-level shit-eating clients instead of pressing at the beginning of the process to say, has this brief that you're giving us now, good or bad, been run up the flagpole and approved by the people at the top? Because we're not going to accept anything less than that when the work is evaluated, because it has to be evaluated against this brief.
Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, that just doesn't work, because the clients who are writing the brief, like you said, Howard, they're mid-level people. They don't have contact with the real decision maker. They don't have contact with that person. They're guessing what their boss thinks someone else wants. And there's so much of that kind of guessing going on. And so, so if the thing that agencies should say is, keep your fucking brief. Let us tell you what we think you should do. And a brief there are two parts to the brief. There's the informational part, where you're given, and then there's the strategic part of the brief, so the informational part is, about the category and all this stuff, and where the brand stands and stuff like that. And once again, I'm making a generalization, but in general, briefs that I've worked with, there's some kind of category information or product brand. And then there's the strategic part of it, where we want and the informational part is valuable, and people need information to write it. The strategic part is usually bullshit, because what passes for strategy in most marketing entities is, it's either it's usually useless. It's usually cliches and jargon and quality and value bullshit like that, and so you know agencies with balls, I think, would say, you know what, give me the informational part of it. Let us do the strategy and the creative part. Don't pen us in with stupid um, boilerplate stuff that isn't going to get us anywhere. Uh, and I maybe it's just me having grown up in the creative department. I think the most important part of what an advertising agency does is the creative work, and generally, it's good creative work that leads to good strategy. So people, they'll see a great ad and they'll say, "What was your strategy?" And then they backfill a strategy to explain. The creative people throw the target on the wall, and the strategists paint the bullseye around it.
One of the things that Henry has talked about repeatedly is that when he collaborates on writing a brief with his creatives, that when he sends them off, everybody's agreed to the brief, and the creatives go off and do their work. Sometimes he'll get some ideas that come back that really have nothing to do with the brief or not directly connected to the brief. And Henry has said many times, it doesn't happen often, but it happens often enough that he can say, look, I'm open to a great idea. The idea has got to be the thing that drives this thing. And if it doesn't line up with the brief the way we talked about it, let's talk about reevaluating where we go.
What I say is the creative process is an iterative and organic process. So we might start out with a roadmap saying we're going to go here, but if the creatives come back with a brilliant idea that wasn't on the roadmap, I can't be so arrogant as to think, oh no, that's not on strategy, therefore we can't. I'm ready to pivot and support the idea if I'm convinced that it makes sense, that it's likely to succeed, and that it's really good work. So
yeah,
but I think that you kind of you touched on something which I think there's a subtlety, which is the strategy part. I think what the problem is, what gets conflated a lot on the client side is marketing strategy versus a communication strategy, right? So they can have all of the MBAs in the world come up with a marketing strategy and say we should be positioned as X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. But then let us solve the communication problem. That's what an agency is there for, to say, okay, you said that people don't consider us because they think our product sucks because they've had bad experiences with it. Now let us come up with a message that will maybe make make them rethink that, and we're going to do it in this way. This is going to be our communication strategy, which is something different, I think. And a lot of these things get conflated. I think marketing gets conflated with advertising all the time to the detriment of advertising. And that's why, you know, Howard and I have had this ongoing dialogue about client briefs versus agency briefs. I'm pretty much will accept whatever client brief the client wants to give us, because I'm going to read it, I'm going to incorporate it into my thinking, and then I'm going to write the real brief that I'm going to give the creatives. And if the client never sees the brief that I write, I'm happy about that, because to me, my brief is the first step of the creative process, and that's a process that should happen behind closed doors. It's us spitballing, and I don't need some mid-level manager giving me a laundry list of features and benefits and legalese to throw into a creative brief, because it doesn't help anybody develop an idea.
Yeah.
So that's my soapbox.
So I want to go back on one thing. Your willingness to allow creatives to critique your strategy. Strategies are not written by God. They're written by semi imbeciles like us. And I
resemble that remark.
And sometimes the people who are writing the ad have a better idea than the geniuses who wrote the strategy. And my experience in the agency business was the best strategists I ever worked with were creative people. Not all. Very few of them were very good at strategy. Maybe 5% or 10%. But the ones who were good at strategy were really good at strategy. And they understood consumer behavior as well as anyone I ever worked with in the agency business, regardless of their title, regardless of whether they had the title, head of strategy or head of planning. And what agencies should do is identify those few people in the agency, regardless of what their titles are, those few people in agencies who are really good at understanding strategy, understanding how consumers work, understanding how advertising affects how consumers work.
I think
and allow those people to weigh in when agencies get bogged down and can't come up with a good strategy. I've seen too many instances in which people who are really good at that kind of thing get ignored because it's not in their title. And it's a big mistake. There are just some people in agencies, and they are often, in my experience, not often, but sometimes in the creative department. And they're really good at understanding this shit and explaining it and figuring it out and knowing where to go with it. And they should not be ignored because their title doesn't have the word strategy in it.
I think you're familiar, Bob, with the study that just came out in the last week from Matt Davies and Peter Paul Von Wheeler called the Better Brief Project.
Yeah.
One of the, it's a ton of information, none of it, necessarily good news. One of the things what I tend to work with marketers, and a lot of the marketers I work with have in-house agencies. They brought their work in-house. Yep. Sometimes they have in-house as well as external, but a lot of them are in-house. So they don't necessarily have the equivalent titles in an in-house that happen in an agency. So a lot of account folks or marketers are doubling as strategy
directors.
That too. So when I saw one of the slides on Peter Paul and Matt's study that said 60% of marketers admitted to using the creative process to figure out their strategy, it was kind of a hand to the forehead slapping experience, because it explained a lot of stuff that when I was practicing creative in agencies, I saw this all the time.
Yeah.
It was very frustrating.
I love that. I loved that. I loved when the client said, I don't know what our strategy is. Show me something that tells me what my strategy should be. To me, that's the essence of that. That's what advertising can really do when it's really good. I don't know if you know, Hal Riney used to say, a great ad is the best strategy. And I agree with that so much. Uh, so much of what passes for strategic thinking in the agency business is shallow, and it doesn't. How many really, I mean, just turn on the TV or go online to any website. How many ads can you find today that are strategically brilliant? It's so rare to see an ad. Like, we see so many ads we see 5,000 ads every day. How often do you see one and you say, wow, that's a great strat? Once a week, maybe.
Mm.
um and uh, so the the advertising business has been infiltrated by marketers who like to think logically, right? They have become successful by thinking logically throughout their careers, throughout their history. They know how to get from point A to point B. Advertising is not logic. Advertising, it's not my court case wins over your court case. That's how advertising works. It doesn't work like that. Consumers don't work like that, and brains don't work like that, and it's mysterious. And some people can't get beyond the idea that advertising is about my benefits are stronger than your benefits, and we need to. And those people get shitty advertising, and the people who will listen to those few creative people who and believe me, not every creative person gets this, but there are a few who just know. I don't know how they know, but they know what's going to work and what's not going to work. Maybe they've been around the block a few times. They've seen it. They can tell you why this idea is better than that idea as an advertising idea. And they can't tell you how they know, so they make up bullshit. They backfill rationales. This is a better ad because of this and this and this and this, and it's bullshit. But somehow they know it is a better ad. They just don't know how they know, and they can't explain it to us.
I agree. I agree with you that I don't think things are as complicated as there's kind of this tendency in the industry to overcomplicate things that aren't that complicated in order to justify your existence. The fact that consumers don't have a lot of attention span for advertising, right? So what do you need to do to get somebody's attention in advertising? One of the, and Paul Feldwick, I think, would argue, and I would agree, one of the things you can do is entertain somebody. They're not going to turn off the commercial if they find it entertaining, if they're going to get a chuckle out of it, if they smile and they laugh or they cry or whatever it is that kind of makes them. And you look at the best campaigns of recent memory, ones like Geico, right, where they've had a lot of, some of it's okay, but a lot of it has been excellent, right? And it's because every time you see and you recognize that it's a Geico ad and it's recognizable, you say, I wonder what they're going to do this time. And as a consumer, that kind of like burrows itself into your head. And next time you need to quote auto insurance, hopefully you'll think about Geico because it's sitting right at the top of your head, because they're like every other commercial is a Geico commercial, but they happen to be pretty good, right? As opposed to other insurance companies that are trying to be pale facsimiles of what Geico is doing that only accrues to Geico anyway, because they're, if you find it funny, you probably think it was a Geico commercial in the morning anyway.
There is one of the things that I think is most successful in advertising. One of the qualities of advertising that I think is most successful is silliness. I think silly advertising is very effective. Now, where are you going to find a marketing brief that says, be silly? Yeah, here's your marching order. Our strategy is silly. There isn't a marketing brief in the world that ever said that. And yet, one of the most effective, I think, aspects of advertising, one of the most effective characteristics of advertising is silliness. So the disconnect between how marketers think and how advertising actually works is enormously large. And I think that is part of why you saw in the study that you referenced, Howard, about the two Aussie guys,
Better briefs.
the better brief, how far apart. I mean, you couldn't be more far apart
It's frightening.
than the marketers and the agency. You could not be, honest to God, you couldn't make it any more far apart. What they believe their briefs are. So, well, what are we going to do? You have to have briefs, right? You still have to, the agency still has to know what's on the client's mind. The creative people still need something to work from. And yet we know it's completely ineffective and bullshit. So what do? I don't know. Brief Brothers, figure the fucking thing out, will you?
Well, you've done the transition for me, Bob. I think we're going to invite you to be our third host. Because, that was something that's in the back of my mind. It seems pretty small potatoes, maybe compared to what we're talking about. But do you recall, or have you any advice on some of the actual nuts and bolts of a really good brief? And I don't mean a template. My argument has always been templates come a dime a dozen. It's how you fill in the template, whether it's 3 words or 30. I mean, one of the things that I argue is keep it to 100 words. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wish it was just a question of how many words it has. I mean, I know what went on in my agency, right? I was the CEO of the agency. I saw all the briefs that went through it. And I know what the people who wrote the briefs just wanted to get it off their desk. What is the brand's situation with that? Oh, look on their website. That's what they would do. And the whole thing's a mess. I don't know. I wish I could offer some wisdom on it, but I think the whole thing is fucked up. And there has to be a new way to communicate between the marketing people on one side and the people who actually create the advertising. The whole telephone system is screwed up, and it always has been. I mean, this is not new. Like I said, I've been around advertising over 40 years. It's never been any different. Never. I don't know how to fix it.
Agreed. I think though, at the individual agency level, to make their lives better, I think and I've mentioned this to Howard before, I think a lot of times what agencies do at the beginning of a new relationship is miss the chance to set a tone. You go, you pitch a piece of business, you win it, everybody's happy, and then everybody settles into what they previously did before. Instead of sitting down, to your point, with the real decision maker and some real leader at the agency, having a kumbaya moment and saying, hey, this is what I want for my brand. And the agency guy saying, hey, I think we can do that by doing this, and coming to some real agreements at the beginning of the relationship so that then the ground rules are set. I think we miss that opportunity often. We never have a conversation. What's the role of creativity? To your point, what do you think about silly advertising? Like, get the CMO's take. He might say, I love silly advertising. I think it's great. But okay, but you've got an army of middle managers below you that don't know that you love silly advertising, and they're never going to approve anything. So what you're going to get is all this recycled crap that you're not going to like, and in 2 years you're going to fire us. So I think we need to take advantage at the beginning of relationships. It's a lot tougher. Like, I work on an account that's been in the agency 25 years. The turnover of both the agency and the client over 25 years, I mean, just incredible. And so there's kind of just working process that's just set, and it's very hard to achieve change.
Yep.
Well, Bob, I think the takeaway I'm going to work on, because I've said it, versions of it, but probably not loudly enough or emphatically enough, is because people ask me all the time in the training, it's like, how do I get the decision maker involved? So it's not like, do I get the decision maker involved? It's how do I get the decision maker involved? Because one of the biggest complaints I get all the time is the 11th hour veto from upstairs.
Sure, because upstairs wasn't involved in the whole process,
Right.
and everyone's working on things assuming upstairs is on board, but
Right.
upstairs isn't on board, and upstairs takes a look at it and says, "What the fuck is it? What?
Right.
What are you doing?"
Well, part of the problem is that a lot of the stuff that's done in the agency doesn't really, I mean, it shouldn't even go across the desk of a CMO. It's too small potatoes, but it does. Or it has to, or people believe that it must. So I think one of the things that I can do as someone who trains and teaches is to really start there and build on what Henry was saying about at the beginning of the relationship. And if it's not the beginning of the relationship, work on fixing that part of the relationship to get connection between the decision maker and the person who can execute the decisions. So,
Hey, Bob, I was
Yeah.
hoping that we could do a quick lightning round of some of your favorite topics.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
The age delusion. Are we getting better in America, or are
Yeah,
we
it's
getting
getting
worse?
worse. The pandemic has given the agency business license to get rid of old people, and because they can, we have to let our business is down 20%. We have to let 20% of our staff go, and then they cherry pick who they're going to let go, and they pretend it was for reasons other than age, but.
And as it relates to advertising and
Yeah.
how we, who we're targeting and how we're targeting them.
Yeah, no, we're not. Maybe I think we're starting to see a little recognition that, people over 50 are not dead. And, but still the bulk of all advertising is going to 18, is directed at 18 to 34-year-olds who have no money, no brains. They'll
No
jump.
experience.
No, and the bulk of the consumer spending is done by people over 50, and the bulk of consumer of the wealth in the country and in the world is by people over 50, and they are the target of maybe 10% of all marketing activity. It's ridiculous. The whole thing is completely fucked up. But I've been banging my head on this for years, and no one wants to hear it. So
I got one, Henry.
I just want to say I think that some people are hearing it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I heard it loud and clear, and it's one of the things that I preach is like, hey, you know what? People over 55 in America own 80% of the wealth in America.
Yeah.
Like, let's not shit on these people. They're the ones that are buying your new automobiles, and they're the ones that are buying refrigerators and houses.
Right.
And often buying it for the 18 to 34-year-olds.
Yes.
Okay, here's another one. Here's a lightning round for you, Bob. Ad tracking.
Ad tracking is the worst thing that has happened to advertising in my lifetime. It has not just harmed the advertising industry, it has harmed society by it is very dangerous for consumers to be followed everywhere. Everything we say, everything we do, everywhere we go, all our email, all our text messages are scanned and compiled, and it's very dangerous. And it has led to all the data that's being collected through tracking is being fed into algorithms, and the algorithms are dividing society very, very badly, and driving wedges between people. And if we don't get on this really soon, it's just going to get worse and worse. and there is no reason why the online advertising industry needs to be involved in constant consumer surveillance. The advertising industry was successful for decades without spying on people, without tracking everything we do and everywhere we go and everyone we talk to. It's completely unnecessary. It's way too dangerous, and it needs to end soon. And if it doesn't end soon, we're in deep, deep trouble.
Are you
You want to
hopeful?
know?
I'm sorry?
You want to
Are
know?
you hopeful? Let me just follow. Are you hopeful, Bob?
I am hopeful in the sense that something happened yesterday in Europe in which in which one of the arms of the GDPR, one of the arms of the one governmental arm that is supposed to be enforcing GDPR, ruled yesterday that essentially, and this is not their exact ruling, but what it essentially comes to is that real-time bidding is illegal. And if this holds up, and it is true that real-time bidding is illegal, then the whole foundation of tracking-based advertising and the whole programmatic ecosystem needs to be overhauled. And so there is a glimmer of hope there, but we'll have to see what happens.
I was going to say the ironic thing is, and you mentioned advertising worked for decades without being so intrusive and creepy. The ironic thing is that Facebook knows actually that hyper targeting based on all of this data is less effective than using Facebook as a mass reach vehicle. When you talk to their reps and they, in the beginning when Facebook was coming up, as they say, the big selling advantage that they claimed they had over other media was the ability to target so that you could efficiently buy only the people who were likely to buy your product.
Right.
Well, it turns out through a ton of testing that if I put out an ad on Facebook just to the general Facebook population, my cost per click or whatever is less than when I try to micro target based on attitudes, behaviors, whatever. So the reality is that the promise of this micro targeting ended up being bullshit, and Facebook is just another broad reach medium like Time Magazine used to be back in the day.
Henry,
And you don't need.
do you have data? Do you have a study that you can point me to on that? What you
I
just
will.
said?
I will look for it, but yes, and I could tell you that currently if you're like doing a buy with Facebook, they're encouraging you to drop a lot of the targeting stuff, and it's not because they're feeling heat. It's
Sure.
because they've seen the numbers and they know that when you just kind of throw something out into the Facebook universe without trying to micro target, that you get a better response rate and a lower cost.
I'd love to see data on that. If you have it, please send it to me.
I'll look it up and I will send it to you.
Well, you make an interesting argument. I think it's in this book, which I'm going to promote, Advertising for Skeptics.
Yeah, it's a great book. Who wrote
It
it?
is an awesome book. It is an awesome
Thank-
book,
Thank you.
right? And you know what? We'll put a link to the.
Straight, hold it a little straighter, will you?
Okay, so
Yeah.
you make an argument in this book about the difference between targeted, the fallacy about target marketing versus to build a brand versus the mass marketing, which has built brands for decades. And I think you quoted Tom Goodwin, who said, well, why is it that no one has ever successfully built a brand by using online advertising? And he answered his own question by saying, well, we've never even tried.
Yeah.
So do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's not that no brands have been built by online advertising. It's no major worldwide huge brands. There hasn't been an Apple or a Nike or a McDonald's or a Budweiser or a Ford or a Chevrolet or a Burger King that's been built by online advertising. And we've had 20 years of online advertising. Why is there not one example of a huge, major worldwide brand? We have these, Warby Parkers and what else? And Harry's Shave Club and
They're
all
long
that.
tail, long
Yeah.
businesses.
Where are the big ones? Where are the Nikes? Where are the Apples that online advertising has built? There aren't any. And so you have to say to yourself, if you're a marketer and you want to build a big worldwide mega brand, why? How come? Why? What is it? And the answer is, to build a big brand, you got to talk to a lot of people. You can't just micro target. That doesn't work. You got to talk to a lot of people. And that's what mass market advertising does. Talks to a lot of people. Are you guaranteed to be successful? No. But are you more likely to be successful if you talk to? Of course you are. But you got to talk to a lot of people and let probability do its job. Probability tells you that the more people you talk to, the more people you're likely to have buy your product.
Facebook, Amazon, and Netflix all use mass market advertising.
Of course they do.
Right.
Yes. Right.
Well, likelihood and probability are the two words I saw repeated more often in your book than any other, and probably in other books as well. Talk about your thinking regarding those two words.
All we have in marketing and advertising are likelihoods and probabilities. There's no definite, there's no yes and no, there's no always and never, there's no black and white, just likelihood. What are the most likely outcomes of doing this or doing that or doing that? And you have to be good at, if you're going to be good at this in this business, you have to be good at judging likelihoods and probabilities. And, the most obvious one and the easiest one and the dumbest one, you don't have to be brilliant to figure this shit out. If you're famous, you're more likely to be successful. How smart do you have to be to figure that out? Just look around you. Open your refrigerator and look at the fucking shit you have in there. And most of it is advertised stuff. That's why you bought it. Not because you understand the meaning of this ketchup versus that mustard, or this cheese has a special brand meaning to me. Bullshit. You're familiar with it, you're comfortable with it, and that's most of the time why you buy it. Now, are there some products that you study? And sure there are. But 96% you don't. 96% you're familiar with it, you're comfortable with it, you buy it. And how did you get familiar with it and comfortable with it? Because it's famous. You've seen it around a lot. Not someone sent you an email.
And I think Byron Sharp would agree with you, and he'd say, and the reason you keep buying it is because there's no reason to buy anything else. You bought it, it worked, and why would I buy anything else?
It's good enough.
And if they run out at the store, there's a second brand that you're comfortable with and that you'll buy in a pinch.
Right.
And you'll probably buy that one until they run out.
I've never been to Target when they didn't have Tide. Never. The problem with Tide is that there's too many versions of it, and I don't know which one to pick. But my mom used it. Her mom used it. That's all I need. And I have no idea what the brand differentiations are, or the points of differentiation, or the brand promise, or any of that. I don't know what that stuff is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up was brand purpose. Tangentially related to what we're talking about. Has there ever been a bigger load of horse shit than brand purpose?
I admire brands that do good things. Okay.
Yes.
I want brands to do good things. Don't rub my fucking nose in it, though. You don't rub my nose in your virtue. I know who you are. Don't pretend to me that you're these wonderful people who want to end poverty in the world, because I know you're not paying your taxes. If you wanted to end poverty, you'd pay your fucking taxes so people could have food to eat. So don't bullshit me on that. Do good things, yes. Rub my nose in it, no. And don't think that when I'm buying things, I'm evaluating, which company is better, and no.
Yeah.
What tastes good? That's what I want to know.
But millennials care about that stuff, Bob.
Don't get me started.
I'll go. I'll go a step further and say, there are brands like, the example I always give is Tom Shoes, right? Like this is a company that does good things. You buy a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes to somebody that doesn't have a pair, right? But when every brand is falling all over themselves to claim that they're saving the world, nobody believes any of it anymore. And the only brands that are hurt are brands like Tom's Shoes, because people are jaded and they don't know what to believe anymore, and they just throw their hands up in the air and say they're all full of shit.
There are some companies that really do good things and really deserve our support for the good things they do. And I think you just gave an example of one. And there are a few like that have differentiated themselves based on that, but they're very few and far between. And the people are always throwing Ben and Jerry's ice cream at me. Do you think anyone would give a shit about Ben and Jerry's politics if the ice cream tasted like shit? No one would care. First, you have to have good ice cream.
Yeah. Bob, speaking of creative, is there an agency or a particular creative out there whose work you really admire?
Well, I've always admired Goodby Silverstein.
Right there in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, Jeff lives around the corner from me, actually. Here, I don't want to get into doing that. It's uncomfortable for me because I have too many friends. I don't want to not mention or.
Okay, well, how about something a little more generic? Do you have some thoughts on the status or the state of creativity in our business today?
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's just, the agency business has always been 85% crap. Okay. Now we're 93% crap. That means there's half as much good stuff as there used to be. And this is not just some old guy saying, the golden age. I'm talking about, if you look at consumer surveys, if you talk to marketing people, they all agree. I mean, there was a study done by BBH a few weeks ago, and in just 20 years, the amount of advertising that people say is annoying has doubled just in the last 20 years. Twice as many people find advertising annoying. So it's not just, some old guy, talking about how great the old days were. The old days were not that great. And a lot of it, most of advertising was always crappy. But it's much more crappy now. And one of the reasons it's perceived as being much more crappy now is online advertising. Online advertising is absolutely disgraceful. And we should be ashamed of ourselves for what we're doing. And but that's what people see mostly now. They used to mostly see TV commercials. And TV commercials, once again, they were mostly crap, but there were some really good TV commercials.
People have nostalgia for the good TV commercials.
And now what they see mostly is online advertising. And if TV commercials are 93% crap, online advertising is 99.999% crap. So it's very disheartening to me to see that the creative aspects of our business have been devalued. And I think it's not healthy for our business. It's not good for our clients. It's not good for anyone. And advertising has become less effective than it used to be. And it's not a mystery why. I don't think it's a mystery. Before COVID, I was going all over the world and speaking. And I would do a lot of speaking in far off places. And everywhere I went, I heard the same two things. Advertising isn't as effective as it used to be. Advertising isn't as creative as it used to be. Everywhere I went, I heard those two things. And you don't have to be a genius to figure out that they're related. They're not happening in a vacuum. They're related. It's not as effective because it's not as creative. I don't think there's a question about it. Yep. Good.
So Bob, let's end on a positive note. What do you see or what are you optimistic about these days?
I'm optimistic that you're displaying my book will get a lot of sales for me the way you held it up nicely.
All
Okay.
10 of our viewers will.
Yeah, well, every one of them will buy 100 copies.
Yes.
And, what am I optimistic about? Not very much. I wish I could. There are still some agencies doing great work, and God bless them, and continue to doing that. Continue to do that. But the agency business has been Wall Streetized. It's been taken over by large consolidated enterprises and financial wise guys who work the edges and know how to you know drag money out of enterprises without necessarily investing in the best parts of those enterprises. So it's not a happy time for advertising. Maybe something will change that, and I'm hopeful that maybe soon something will.
So I'm going to tag on to that and say what makes me optimistic is that usually things like this are pendulum shifts. And yes, things are bad now, but at some point there will be a new generation of creatives like Bernbach back in the day, and said, advertising wasn't great in the 50s, and then all of a sudden we had this creative revolution. Maybe there'll be a new independent shops coming up that will lead the way. I'd like to think that somewhere that creativity is going to have an outlet, and the pendulum will shift back. Just like Howard talked about in-house agencies. We see that shift all the time. Like clients bring in all the advertising in-house, and then they get rid of that and they go out and they get advertising agencies again. So that's the only thing that has me optimistic, is that nothing lasts forever. And I don't think that this bad time that we're going through in advertising is going to last forever.
That's a good place to end, on a nice, hopeful note.
Bob, we are grateful and delighted that you could join us. Henry and I have been doing this for about 10 months, and we have about 47 really loyal viewers. We're hoping that maybe because you're here, we'll crack 50.
That would be great.
So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice to meet you guys, and good luck with what you're doing.
And he's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. And together, we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.